All right, we are going to make our first step towards earning our creative problem solving badge. We do that with Unit 6. So I'm going to go to the home page, go to Unit Modules. You can also do it for modules. And I think the screen recorder I'm using here is kind of slowing things down a bit, but it will work. I'll close any programs I'm not using. All right. So Unit 6 is our first proving ground. Whenever we do something new in the class, under Unit Modules, I'll show it as gray. So we've done assignments, we've done exercises, now we're doing our first proving ground. What this proving ground is going to show us is that we can identify patterns, we can make sense of data, we can frame novel problems in familiar terms, and we can recognize commonalities among seemingly unrelated situations. So what's the data? As we're using assets, in this case, a settings asset and a figurative asset, right? We need to understand their resolution and what they are optimized for presentation, whether they're good for screen resolution or whether they're good for print resolution. The commonalities among seemingly unrelated situations, even though these creatures were created or these assets were created separate from each other, we need to make their light direction match, and we need to make the angle of anatomy of the creature match the setting. And then we need to frame novel problems in familiar terms. So we're actually going to have to write for this and say how we think our creature would exist in this environment, right? Whether we're using the setting that we created in assignment 1 or whether we're using a setting that we find. So it helps us reflect on our artwork in new ways. So what does this look like in practice? It looks like this. A creature design put into a setting where the anatomy of the creature, like their feet and their posture and their balance, all matches the perspective of the setting, and the lighting of the setting matches what's on the creature. So how do we measure this? You want to make sure that your creature takes up about 25% or more of the full scene. So this isn't a Where's Waldo project where you're trying to hide your creature somewhere in the scene. You need it to take up at least a quarter of the image. Then you need to recognize what the physical dimensions are of that creaturescape and what its resolution potential is. And then you have to label that as either print resolution or screen resolution. Here you see one that's only big enough to be screen resolution. Here's one that's big enough to be print resolution. And then you are going to write about finding commonalities, right? And about making connections between your creature and its environment. And then we have more examples here. All right, let's get started. So the ideal way to do this is as an opportunity to improve your last two assignments. And it doesn't matter if your creature is very, very different than your setting or not. So in movies like Mary Poppins and movies like Space Jam, like the 1996 Space Jam, they're able to put animated characters into real life settings simply by acknowledging the light direction, right? And it's not like these would ever fit in, these Monstars would ever fit in a photographic world, but it's believable in the scene because they are being affected by the same angle of anatomy and lighting. So that's everything. So our proving grounds, you have to get 100% on them in order to earn the badge by the end of the semester. And you can resubmit these and improve these after the deadline, but the rubric determines how successful you are at it. So the first thing we did is really, we're going to place our creature onto a landscape background in a way that uses a common light direction and accommodates for the angle of our creature's anatomy. That's our first step. Our next step is then to see what the pixel dimensions are and the physical format is for that creaturescape, and then write that, like understand that data, and then identify it as either being good enough for screen or good enough for print. And then lastly, we're going to write a little paragraph explaining how our creature is intended to interact with its environment. How does it breathe? How does it shelter? How does it eat? That kind of thing. All right. So you don't need inspiration for this, but I do have inspiration for this because my creature was the crab creature. So let's get our files ready. I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to call it Proving Ground number 1. And I need to now collect my sources. And I'm on a different computer, so I actually don't have my PSD files here. I'll have to plug them in. Haha, that's why I have things backed up in 2 places, right? So I'm going to plug in my SD card. But in dire circumstances, I could just pull the JPEG for the landscape that I assigned, put into assignment 1 for Canvas, and I could pull the PNG that I turned in for assignment 2. The problem is it's better to have the PSD for the landscape because that will have multiple layers. So that's why I'm going to pull it from my SD card. So my SD card is here. I have it nicely organized. And I'm going to bring my master folder onto the desktop. I'll bring both of them on. And SD cards are fast because I don't ever want to work just from my card because that would really slow things down. But it's almost done. Skeletor is coming online. Okay, now I already created a Proving Ground 1 folder, and I already put these assignments in it, right? So what are the 2 assignments you want in your Proving Ground 1 folder? You want the PNG of your creature cut out, and you want the Photoshop file, the PSD of your landscape. So that's going to open up in Photoshop. And the first task is to figure out how to place your creature into this landscape in a way that you can match the creature's anatomy, and I'll show you how to match the lighting. So here's my landscape. Actually, the very first thing I'm going to do is change the name. So now that I have this in the Proving Ground 1 folder, I also have it in my Assignment 1 folder. How do I move it over? Well, if you hold down Option, it will make a duplicate of it. So I'm just move that to the desktop, right? So if you hold down Option and you move it to the desktop, I'll do that with this. Then you're going to rename it. And instead of Assignment 1, this is going to be Proving Ground 1. And then I can open it up. Now, I'm going to go to the topmost visible layer, which is this little texture overlay there, and I'm going to drag and drop my PNG creature, which, because we did it at high resolution, will take up a lot of space. And now I have to think, where would I want to place this creature in my landscape? Do I want him perched on the rock right there? That might be one option, so I'll hit return. It's still a smart object. Then I'm going to duplicate it. And because it's a smart object, I can resize it any way I like, and it'll be fine. Do I want him to be like a kaiju-sized entity that's kind of reaching from the middle ground out of the mists? And if that's the case, then I can start moving him down through the layers behind the foreground. Right? And I can have him kind of like that. And I can tilt him. I can Command T. I can have him climbing over this back mountain. With all those legs, it's going to be a little tricky making his anatomy match, but I'll show you how we can. So that's another option. Or do I want him really tiny and crab size? So I made another duplicate. Where is he? So I'm going to shrink him down, and he's going to be like regular crab size, just kind of hanging out on the ground here. Those are some options I have. We're hanging out on that rock. Now, here's the issue. Any one of these can work, but the creature needs to take up 25% of the image. So of these three, let's see, I'll mark them as red. Of these three options, which one should I pursue? So I'll let the class decide. That's 2. Where's my third? Right there. Okay, so we have like kind of big, medium, and small. Who votes for the biggest one? Raise your hand. Okay, who votes for the medium one? Raise your hand. So it's about equal. Who votes for the smallest one? Okay, well, we got the fewest votes for the smallest one. So now let's just make it between these two. Okay. So you could make a lot of little ones. That's another option, right? But now, this is what I want you to understand. So you're going to vote for one or the other. If I use this one, then that composition is fine. How can I know? If I use the crop tool and then I click the arrow up or down, it will show me what are called the third lines. These third lines show you the composition split into a 9-square grid. Your creature needs to fill, or not fill, but at least occupy 3 of those 9 squares. If it only occupies 2 squares or 1 square, it is not filling up 25% of the composition. Does that make sense? So this is filling up 4 squares, or at least is occupying 4 squares. So this is big enough. Do you guys agree? And to make it easy, I'll just put guides around so you can see these third lines in real time without having to use the crop tool, which is a dangerous tool. Now, the idea of the crop tool is also focal points should line up with the third lines. So that's a pretty good composition for the big one because it's the rule of thirds. So it has the main focal point right where 2 of those third lines intersect. So that's a pretty good place for a focal point. All right, let's get off the crop tool. So, what about this one? Let's turn this one off. Is that taking up enough space? No, but how can I get it to take up enough space? I can crop it, right? I can crop my composition to any size I want. And then, if I use the crop tool, and then click up and then down, I see those third lines. Now is it taking up enough space? It is. So that's what you're voting between, right? So I'll put guides around this. There's going to be a lot of guides. So let's see a show of hands for this composition. I'm going to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone has to vote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So that means that more than 6, which is more than half the class, like this composition better. Make sense? So just to be sure, raise your hand if you like this composition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, yes. So we're going to do this one. What's the good news about that? Well, this one is the biggest resolution, right? but there's no resolution or size requirement for this project. There's just the requirement that you know what the size is and what you can do with it. Now, another option is if I wanted to use the little ones, like Joe was saying, and I wanted them to take up 25% or more of the image, I don't necessarily need to crop it down so that he's interacting with more space like that. Though this would be probably kind of a good composition for that. Instead, I could simply do a lot of multiples of this little guy. So make, a little army of them. And scatter them around so that they're occupying at least 3 of those squares. Does that make sense? So that's another option you have. A lot of work, but it's an option. The whole point is we're not trying to hide the creature, we're trying to make the creature match. So, of those, all those are smart objects. Our creature should be plenty big enough to use in any way we want. So now we have to first pose them. We're going to pose first, then we're going to deal with lighting. Okay? So what tools do we have to pose? First of all, I'm going to mark the smart object. That's the PNG I brought in. And then I'm going to duplicate it, Command J. And then I'm going to right click and rasterize the duplicate so I can make changes to it. Why do I keep the smart object? This is what's called the hero asset. So just like we kept smart objects for things that we composited from, now we're keeping the smart object at high resolution of our creature design in a way that can't be edited. So that's the smart object. We leave it there, but we turn it off. Next, what we have is a rasterized image. And I'm going to go ahead and move this up in front of everything, just so I can see all of its parameters. And I'm going to pose it so it feels like it's touching that mountain. So actually, maybe I need to keep it behind. I'm using left bracket and right bracket. Interesting. No matter what I do, I can't get it behind the tip of that tooth, but I'll figure out why. Okay, so now if I turn it off, what do I see? Oh, it's because that is the tip of the tooth. Okay, so now how can I pose my creature? Well, I could just use warp. I could use distort, but there's a much better tool for things that are cleanly cut out. And that tool is Edit Puppet Warp. So if I go to Edit Puppet Warp, it's the same place where Transform is. It's just above Free Transform. It's 2 above Free Transform. What that does is for my clean cutout layer, it makes what's called a polygonal grid. So it turns it into polygons, like a 3D model almost, but it's not 3D. And now I'm going to click pins where I want it to stay put, or where I want to move it from, like a puppet. So I'm going to move its claws, I'm going to move its head, and I'm going to move its legs. So what does this look like? When I move one pin, I click and drag, all the other pins will stay put. Does that make sense? So if I move a claw like that, all the other pins stay put. And if I want to undo it, I hit Command Z. So I'm going to move this claw in and up like that. I'm going to move this leg down and in. Maybe even, you know what? I'm actually just going to bend this out because I'm going to take it off. Because it would have to be back here. And so I'm just going to trim it. But this leg I'm going to move down. And this leg I'm going to move down. So it fits. And maybe I need another point here where I bring that in. Okay? This leg I can bring in a little bit, kind of stabilize it. And this claw, what do I want to do with? I'm going to push this up and out a little bit. And then I can play with the head and just kind of, is it sunk in? Is it reared up? What do I want it doing? Okay, now I hit return. Now because I have my hero asset underneath, that's what I started with. This is what Puppet Warp gave me. Now it's got some issues. It's rasterized, so now I can start posing it. So I'm going to trim this out for this pose. That leg is going to be hidden, so I don't want it flailing in the air. But if I'm clever, instead of just deleting it, what I can do is hit Command X, which deletes it but puts it on the clipboard, and then hit Command V to paste it onto a new layer. And then I can play with that, maybe in the background here, maybe shrink it a little bit, and then tuck that behind. And do I want to deal with it or not? Something to think about. Maybe I want like just that shadow right there. Maybe angle it. There we go. So I see that back leg kind of there. Do you guys see that? What about the other side? This got a little complicated because my Puppet Warp moved that on top of this. So I look at my hero asset and I see, okay, that's what the leg should look like. So I'm going to internally composite for my hero asset and duplicate this, Command J, turn my hero asset off, and then put this in the right place. Because Puppet Warp is still all on just one layer. Okay. Good. So now I feel like the legs are positioning. I'm going to trim out these little extra claws. And there we go. So now I need to merge all of that into one layer. So I have this leg here. I want to make sure it's nicely seamed in. These are all the compositing skills we've learned before. So how can I blend that if I'm not sure? I can use my eraser, soft edged, regular eraser, at 100% opacity first. And I actually like that little hard edge there. There we go. And now I'm going to bring all of these layers together. So there's this layer, there is the main guy, and then there is this leg that's hanging out back here. And maybe before I merge them into the same layer, I'm going to burn that leg into shadow a little bit. I'm just going to use the burn tool, exposure of less than 30, nice, large, soft edge on the midtones, and I'm just going to burn the shadows of that back. Okay, now I can select all three of those layers. I'm going to go to Layer Merge Layers, or the shortcut is Command E. Now they're all in one place. And it is posed to fit into this setting. Problem is, I don't like that his hands are covered. So I want his hands to be reaching out beyond this rock. Right? So how can I do that? Well, one easy way is to take this claw and internally composite it. What does that mean? It means hit Command J, duplicate it, and then move it up above the rock. Not behind it, but above it. Right? And now I might think, okay, so it's above the rock now. Maybe I want a different position. So maybe I should rotate it a little differently. But no, that doesn't work quite as well. So these are all things you're considering as you're posing it. Maybe I want something in between. So this was the hero reference. It's marked red. And the claw was there. And actually, maybe that's the best place for the claw. So I'm going to steal the claw from my hero asset when I first brought it in, before I puppet warped it. And then duplicate that on top. Command J. Turn off that claw. Turn this guy on, my merged layer, and then move that claw to fit in with the anatomy of my posed creature. So what's the only step I have left? I'm going to mark this guy green because this is my posed creature now. I need to erase the claw on that layer. So that's the claw I want to use. This is the one with the claw I don't want to use. And so I need to trim it out. Oh, that's the claw, the other claw. This is the claw I want to use. Okay, good. What about this claw? So sometimes there's a lot to do with posing, sometimes not so much. I think this claw will work from the posed asset. So I'm going to grab it here, make sure I get all of it, and then just duplicate and move it above. You can also change your landscape if you want to. All right. There we go. But what is that from? What am I missing? Ah, here. So it's a lot about organizing layers, of course. So now I have the claws over the top of it. Now, it doesn't quite, so the pose is believable, right? But is the lighting believable? The lighting's kind of confusing, right? Especially where the claws are going over the top of the rocks. So what do? So all of the greens, these are for my creature, right? And then I'm going to try to clarify my landscape. I'm going to try to simplify it. So I'm not using this. I'm going to delete that. I can delete the smart objects I'm not using, except for my hero asset, which I want to keep. So I'm not using that claw. I'm not using this rock. Maybe I'm using that rock. Yes, I'm not using this rock. I'm not using that rock. Not using this. So we're cleaning it up so we have kind of clean assets. And I don't need the sketch from assignment 1 anymore. I just need the background. And I can use the sky and this backdrop. My creature's in front of all of those, so I can merge all of those together. The back mountain. But I might use this opportunity to clarify it a little bit. Like I don't want this point anymore on that back mountain. Remember, it's not hurting your assignment 1 because you have your assignment 1 saved already. So I'm going to use a soft-edged eraser at 100% opacity. And I'm going to just shift that background a little bit. Then maybe go to a low opacity and blend it in a little bit more. So it's not quite as distracting. Then go to a really low opacity and just take out a little bit of that shadow. Okay, now I can merge all of those together, those 4 layers, Command E or layer merge layers. So that's my background. Now I have my middle ground where my creature is. I keep that together. Now I have my creature, and then I have all these different attributes. So this rock isn't going anywhere, so I can merge that together. So now it's one thing, right? And since it's one thing, I can play with it if I want to. Like I can change its shape. I can even puppet warp it. So how do I do that? Edit, puppet warp. I have to not be on transform to do it, but edit, puppet warp. And I'm going to tug it. I want it to definitely be stuck here, but I can tug this point up and out so it's a little bit more dramatic. So it's a really fun way to target your selections. I can even push these teeth down a little bit. So if I turn off my character, does that still work in the landscape? Yeah, pretty well. In some ways, you could even say it's a bit of an improved landscape. Okay, now I put my creature in, and I have to figure out how to light this creature. So first of all, I can't merge my creature all into one layer while there are still parts of it that are behind it and parts of it that are in front. But what I can do is cut out my creature anywhere that it is around this. So I selected the empty space around this rock, right? And then what I'm going to do is duplicate my creature with that hole in it. So what does that look like? If I take the rock away, now my creature is missing that because I've already posed it. Why does that have an advantage? Well, now I can merge that creature along with its claws all into one layer, which means I can do direct adjustments on it all in one place. So I select those layers and I say layer merge layers or Command E. And now this is my hero asset that's already posed. And I turn the rock on. Where is it? Don't need that rock anymore. Don't need this anymore. There it is. All right. And then the foreground. Yeah, I'll keep that in. Okay. So now how do I make my creature, which is now all on this layer, match lighting-wise? Well, the first thing I can do is I can play with direct adjustments. So you know these, they're the 3 direct adjustments. I'm going to make it full screen, Command O, and I'm going to say image adjustment levels first. Now what I would like to do is actually make a duplicate of it first, and I'm going to mark this now as orange, just so I can compare it easily without having to go back in history. So adjustments, levels, do I want it to go darker or do I want it to go lighter? I think I definitely want it to go a little darker in the midtones, and I want to limit its highlights because it's in that middle ground. Next, color balance. This can make a big difference. Midtones, going to push it more towards the blues and the cyans. Already that's making a big difference. A little bit more towards the magentas. Shadows, I'm going to push towards the blues and the cyans and the magentas. And then highlights, I'm going to push, also towards the blues and the cyans, but I'm going to push it a little bit more towards the red. All right, so I don't lose those eyes. So far, is this looking different? That's what I had. This is now what I have with levels and color balance. But you see how much more colorful my creature is than the environment. So the last adjustment is hue saturation, image hue saturation. I can shift the hue one way or the other, and it seems to help if I move it a little bit to the left. And then the saturation, I can intensify it, or I can take the saturation down a bit. And you see how that really helps it match that setting. Okay, and then again, this is what I had. This is after doing direct adjustments. Big, big difference. And by merging it all into one layer before I did that, it means I don't have to do that 3 times. One for each claw, one for the body. Now we get to new skills, because all of that is just things we've learned before. This is the new skill for the shadows, because there needs to be drop shadows underneath the creature, especially on this rock. I need them on the rock itself. What I'm going to do is create a new layer. This is what's called a non-destructive overlay layer. So I need to make sure I see my layers. I'm going to click above everything, above the topmost layer. I can get rid of all of these. Right, so simplify, kind of clarify, so every layer makes sense to you. You want to keep your hero assets, but other than that, everything should be necessary and cleaned up. Okay, now, that's just some atmosphere, so I'll get rid of that for now, because that will help later. Now what I want is to build a new layer on top of everything else, and then say edit fill with middle gray, 50% gray, normal 100%. It's called a non-destructive overlay layer because this is where I'm going to do my tool adjustments. This is where I'm going to add shadows with the burn tool, right? Let's say like there, without having to affect the pixels underneath. But look where I burned that shadow. And then I'm going to use the dodge tool to make highlights. Again, below 30 on the midtones, big and soft. Say I make a big highlight right here. Okay, now when I change this layer to overlay mode, the only things you'll see are where I burned and where the highlight is. So if I fill this layer again, edit fill, this is my non-destructive overlay layer, 50% gray, it's as though it's absolutely doing nothing. But if I dodge and burn on it, then it will affect everything below it. So let's label that a non-destructive overlay layer. I'm going to mark that gray, and I only ever use gray for that. So what does that mean? Well, I'm on the dodge tool right now. So what I can do is add highlight anywhere on the image where I think that would help. Like maybe on this middle ground rock. Maybe on the foreground. Maybe on some of these textures. So that's dodging. Maybe on the character itself. Now let's burn. Same thing, midtones only. Where do I want to burn? I need a strong shadow underneath this claw. Now the problem is, what's happening to the claw as I burn that shadow? It's also affecting the claw. So now I can move that non-destructive overlay layer down behind the claw, but still on top of the rock. See that difference? So you can use multiples of these to help. So I'm doing a non-destructive overlay layer that's behind my creature, but on top of this rock. Okay. Sometimes it won't get the midtones, it won't get the highlights. So I'm going to also burn down the highlights. Now, non-destructive has its limits because it's working from middle gray, right? If I turn this to normal mode, it looks like that. So I can't get it too much darker than that. So in that case, I need to go to the actual pixels to dodge things that aren't midtones or to burn them. So I do it on a duplicate. So I'm going to burn it there and then put the non-destructive overlay layer over the top of it. Now, the other reason I like to do this in its own layer is because then I can also erase away from it. So if I feel like my non-destructive overlay is too strong, what can I do? I can always take the opacity of it down and figure out when those shadows feel right, which I think is about there. But maybe they feel right here, but they feel too bright there. So what can I do? I can use my eraser at a low opacity, and I can soften them. Is this making sense? All right. Now what if I need to burn my creature? Like these legs should be darker. Well, this is also what's cool. What if I duplicate my creature layer? Command J, duplicate it. And then I'm going to fill it with gray. There's a few ways to do this. I'm going to show you the way that doesn't require layer styles. I'm going to select with the magic wand all skills we've learned before with contiguous turned off. I'm going to click on the empty space around my creature. Right? Then I'm going to say select inverse. This is on a duplicate of my creature. Then I'm going to say edit fill 50% gray. Then I'm going to mark the layer as gray and relabel it non-destruct creature. And then what blending mode do I need to turn it to so it doesn't look gray anymore and instead allows me to dodge and burn on top of it without hurting? I need to change it from normal to overlay. Absolutely. So now I can dodge and burn right on it. So let's see. Always on the midtones with overlay layers. So I'm going to burn these back legs. Going to burn the mandibles a little bit. Is there anywhere I want to dodge? Not necessarily. Maybe a little bit on this side of the head so that I can use the dodge tool. And if I use a tablet, it's pressure sensitive, so I don't need to always be so clunky with it. But for dodge and burn, being non-destructive is really helpful because it's a really powerful adjustment, those tool adjustments, and they can push things really far, really quick. Also, by doing it on an overlay layer, it's only going to adjust the midtones. So you're not going to be able to push it really far without going to the pixels itself. So if I determine I need to do that, I can always make another duplicate of my creature, Command J, and then I can dodge it right there, right on that creature, and burn it. And that will allow me to do things like affect the highlights as well. All right, what if, because this creature is so big and spanning from the middle ground to the foreground, I want to adjust the coloring of just a part of the creature instead of the whole layer. So I can take the claws, just select those, and then do direct adjustments just to that selection. And in this case, I'm just going to play with our color balance, and I'm just going to warm up the claws a little bit to help them come forward. So you can see the difference that makes. All right, now I've got the shadows on the rock kind of working for the creature. And the more you know about light logic, the more you can adjust those. The shadows are sharpest at the base. What I need are shadows on this back rock and darkened here. So I'm going to find that layer, and then I'm going to dodge and burn it. And I can do it on a duplicate if I want to. So I'm going to push those midtones as dark as I can. And then I'm going to do something which is really scary, but that's why it's on a duplicate layer. I'm going to actually burn the shadows. And this is when it starts to go to black. So I want to be judicious about it. And then I'm going to take those claws on my creature layer and then burn those down a little bit too. And I might use that opportunity to burn the highlights a little bit too. And then the only thing I want to show up a little bit better in this setting is this mandible. Now that mandible is taking on very saturated color, right? How do I fix that? I use the sponge tool to desaturate. But it's also taking on kind of the wrong color. So this shows your understanding of compositing, where you can control the pixels on different layers. I'm going to go to image adjustments. I'm going to go to hue saturation. I'm going to shift the hue of that selection. So it's more in the reds, a little less saturated, a little brighter. Nope, not a little brighter. A little warmer. And because it's on a duplicate, right, even if I push it a little too far, I can always use my low opacity eraser to blend it in. And that highlight's too bright, so I'm going to burn just the highlight. So this is really kind of bringing all the different adjustments we've learned about together. Oh, and the highlight is actually strong from my non-destruct layer. So how can you erase from your non-destruct layer? Well, you can just use the eraser, or you can actually paint with middle gray, and that will also make it invisible on the non-destruct layer. So many things we can do. There we go. Okay, now I got to ask myself, well, let me just do a quick burn here. On this rock. There we go, right there, that helps. Okay, so now we have to ask ourselves, in this setting, does the angle of the anatomy of our creature match the setting? If the answer is yes, then we've met that. Does the lighting direction and the feel of the lighting match the setting? If yes, then you're good. And then how can you improve it even further? You can add in atmosphere, right? So we did this a little bit. How do we add in what are called texture overlays? I'm going to go to Pixabay, or maybe I'll stop this video and then do that. Well, no, we're close to the end of class, so let's just finish it. All right, so I'm going to go to Pixabay. This is going to be a longer video, but I am going to look for the asset I use most from Pixabay, Creative Commons Open, and it's just clouds. Come on, computer.
Mine's doing that too.
Which is weird because these are hardwired. It's not the wireless. Let's see if we have any internet at all. Nope. All right. So I'm going to do it with internal compositing, right? So clouds, remember where I got this wood from. I'm going to duplicate it a lot. I got this from Pixabay as just cloud reference. Now I'm going to merge all those together. I just made about 70 copies of it. Shift, Command E. This is basically what I got from Pixabay, right? These misty mountain clouds. Now what I'm going to do is stretch that above everything, and I can use warp and make this basically just what's called a texture fill. I want to get those trees out of there. So we're just filling the landscape with mist and with cloud. You see that? Doesn't matter that I'm making it bigger than its original pixels. I can then crop it down because this is a soft textural element. This is what's called a texture overlay. For concept settings, you want to use it to create atmosphere and air. So I'm going to take the opacity way down, and you can see how that gives a sense of the air quality to everything. Okay? And now I'm going to use my eraser, low opacity, really large, to disperse it. So where do I want the air to be thinnest? Where do I want it to be thickest? So I can thin it out in the back here, and I can let it be thicker in the foreground or in the middle ground. And then I can really thin it out as it gets into the extreme foreground. And maybe I'll thin it out a little bit around the claws since they're breaking through it a bit. So they don't feel so flat, they feel more dimensional. And that's without it, that's with it. And I'm recognizing that this claw needs to be burned a little bit just at its tip. So all these kind of adjustments. And maybe the landscape needs to be brightened a bit or darkened a bit behind the claw. Oh, it's mostly here that needs to be erased out from the other texture overlay. There we go. All right, so what does that texture overlay actually look like? Well, if I set it to 100%, it looks like this. I've erased away a lot from it, but then I can just take it all the way down with opacity. And I can play with the color of it. So I can go to adjustments, hue saturation, and I can play with the spectrum of that color. Right? So if I want to warm it up or cool it down, pretty cool. And just kind of erase it away anywhere I want it to be really a little bit more clear. Okay, now I think this is good. So I'm going to save it. File, save as. Make sure it's called Proving Ground, not Assignment 1, to the desktop as a PSD. I'll update the one I have. Check your desktop. Make sure it's there. Looking for it. There it is. Right. Now, I'm going to go to File, Save a Copy, and I'll save it as a JPEG to the desktop. Same name, Proving Ground 1. Make sure it's there. Actually, I'm going to do that again. save a copy, because I want it to be only around 5 megabytes. As a JPEG, save, and take the slider down till the preview is less than 5 megabytes. Okay, check that that's there. There it is. I mark that orange. That's going to go into Canvas. Okay, now I am not done. I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to say in Photoshop, Layer Merge Visible, while holding down Option to give me a non-destruct merge at the top. And then I'm going to go Image Autotone. What that does is that balances the histogram. Hugely different. And then what I'm going to do is take my opacity down on that and see if that helps at all. Because sometimes when we add all this texture overlay and all the dodging and burning, everything can get muddy. So by adjusting out the levels, that can help sharpen it a little bit. So I like it about there. That feels very believable to me. So now I'm going to save it again, Command S, and then go to File, Save a Copy, JPEG, to the desktop at 11, so it's under 5 megabytes. There it is. Good. Now I'm ready to submit it. But that's not the end of Proving Ground 1. That just meets all the imaging requirements for it. So I might not be able to get onto it. Let's see. Or edit it. Oh, looks like I'm able to. Good. So this is requirement 1. It's the image. And this is the second part of the rubric. So I'll say rubric number 2. You don't need to label them. I'm just trying to be really clear. And now I move it in from the desktop, the JPEG, because it fills a rectangle. As long as the internet's working, it should work. But the next thing I need to do, while that's working, I need to work on this next part of the rubric, which is to accurately identify the resolution in pixels per inch. So I'm going to write this down. I need to open it up with Photoshop. Doesn't matter if it's the JPEG or the PSD. And then I need to go to image size. And I need to physically write down and understand what this means. So you can have 2 resolutions. You can have either 300. I'm going to uncheck resample because this is about what those actual pixels are that I posted. These pixels will not change. You can either have a 300 resolution, which is standard minimum print resolution, and take the measurements from that. That's what I'm going to do. So at 300 pixels per inch, it is 16.1 inches by 11.5 inches. Or the other resolution you might need is 72. And at 72 pixels per inch, that's screen resolution. At 72 pixels per inch, this is 67 inches by 48 inches. Now, why might you need to use 72 instead of 300? It's if your image is smaller than 8 by 10 when it's at 300 pixels per inch. Does that make sense? It's only print resolution if it's above 8 by 10 and above 300 pixels per inch. All right. So this one is going to be screen resolution. Right. And I didn't change anything. Those are the exact same pixels. It's just the expression of it and what the potential is for it. Okay. So then I type those underneath my creature. Just like you see here. And my creature is not going in, but I can type that just to show you. So it's going to be standard print resolution. And then I give the dimensions 16.1 inches by 11.5 inches at 300 pixels per inch. Don't use 350 because that's not a standard print resolution. That means I can print this up to 11.5 by 16 inches, right? So this is requirement 2. And it's the rubric criteria 1. But you can only know the size. Yeah, I'll have to do that later. But you can only know the size once you've finished your image. And luckily, we don't need the internet to use Photoshop, right? Or to back up our work. And it is, I think, still recording. So the third requirement is then to write your description of how your creature lives in that environment. Only need like a paragraph. It doesn't need very much, but it shows that you're thinking through those connections. What does it breathe? What does it eat? Where does it shelter? What is it preyed or what is it food for? You know, all that kinds of things. How does it camouflage? Whatever comes to mind. All right, that's it for today. If you want to get information about your group presentation, please look at Unit 8. It's on your course outline as well, because today's the first day your group can start signing up for topics for it. Yeah, and I can't show you. So, if you look at the group presentation, when you have an internet connection, look at Unit 8. You'll see some examples. There's only 2 topics that aren't allowed. They're the 2 that are demonstrated. All right. And we'll talk about that and assign topics next class. Sorry for the internet difficulties.